The moving truck pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a trail of dust and the echo of diesel engines. 16-year-old twins David and Diana stood on the front porch of their new house, watching their old life disappear down the quiet suburban street. The neighborhood was different from anything they had known before. White picket fences lined perfectly manicured lawns, and not a single face in sight looked like theirs. "Well, this is it," their father, Colonel James Washington, said, as he joined them on the porch. His military uniform was crisp despite the long day of moving. Home sweet home, at least for the next 2 years. Diana kicked at a small stone with her sneaker. "It's so quiet here, Dad. Back at Fort Bragg, you could always hear something happening." "Different doesn't mean bad, sweetheart." Their mother, Dr. Patricia Washington, called from inside the house. She appeared in the doorway, her nurse's scrubs replaced with casual clothes, her hair pulled back in a tired ponytail. "The hospital seems really nice, and the schools here have excellent programs." David leaned against the porch railing, his dark eyes scanning the neighborhood. At every military base they had lived on, there had been families from all backgrounds. Kids who understood what it meant to move every few years, to start over, to adapt. Here everything felt frozen in time, like a movie set where they were the only people who didn't belong. "I counted 3 different security company signs just on this block," David observed. "Think they're worried about something?" His father chuckled. "Son, some folks just like feeling safe. Nothing wrong with that." The twins had learned not to judge places too quickly. Over the years, they had lived in Germany, California, Texas, and North Carolina. Each move had taught them something new about adapting, about reading people, about finding their place. But this felt different somehow. The next morning came too soon. Diana stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her backpack straps, for the 3rd time. The room still smelled like fresh paint and cardboard boxes. Her martial arts medals hung on the wall next to her academic awards, reminders of who she was beneath all the uncertainty. "You ready for this?" David asked from her doorway. He was already dressed, his own backpack slung over one shoulder. "As ready as anyone can be for being the new kids again," Diana replied. "At least we're together." They had been each other's constant through every move, every new school, every challenge. While other military kids struggled with the constant changes, the twins had turned it into their strength. They learned to read rooms quickly, to spot trouble before it found them, to support each other when everything else felt uncertain. Their mother drove them to Lincoln High School that first morning. The building was bigger than their last school, all red brick and tall windows that seemed to stare down at them. Students clustered in groups across the front lawn, chatting and laughing, in the way that only comes from years of shared history. "Remember," their mother said as they got out of the car, "first days are always the hardest, just be yourselves." The twins exchanged a look. Being themselves had never been the problem. It was getting others to see past their assumptions that usually proved challenging. The main office was bustling with activity. The secretary, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, handed them their schedules and locker assignments. "You're the Washington twins, right? Welcome to Lincoln High. I'm sure you'll love it here." David and Diana navigated the crowded hallways, noting the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed in their wake. It wasn't unusual. New students always attracted attention. But there was something different about the way people looked at them here, a kind of careful observation that made Diana's shoulders tense. "Locker 247, David read from his paper. "Yours is 249. At least they kept us close." They found their lockers in a hallway lined with college preparation posters and honor roll announcements. As they worked their combinations, Diana became aware of a group of students watching them from across the hall. 4 boys, all wearing letter jackets, all sporting the kind of confident smirks that usually meant trouble. "Don't look now," Diana murmured to her brother. "But I think we've got an audience." David glanced over casually. "The welcoming committee?" "Something like that." The warning bell rang and the hallways erupted into controlled chaos as students rushed to their first period classes. The twins separated, David heading to advanced physics while Diana made her way to AP literature. Diana's English Teacher Mrs. Rodriguez was warm and welcoming. She introduced Diana to the class with genuine enthusiasm, and several students offered friendly smiles. For a moment, Diana allowed herself to hope that maybe this place would be different. "We're studying contemporary American poetry this semester," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as Diana took her seat. "I'd love to hear your perspective, especially coming from different places around the country." The class discussion was engaging, and Diana found herself participating more than she usually did on first days. A girl named Jennifer, sitting beside her, shared her notes from previous classes and promised to show her around during lunch. David's morning went similarly well. His physics teacher was impressed with his background knowledge, and his calculus instructor mentioned that David's previous school had prepared him exceptionally well. The academic transition, at least, seemed promising. But it was during the transition between classes that the twins began to notice the pattern. Conversations would quiet as they passed. Groups would shift slightly, creating barriers rather than openings. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. At lunch, they met in the cafeteria as planned. The room was a maze of circular tables, each one claimed by its own social group. Diana spotted Jennifer from her English class and waved, but the girl looked away quickly, suddenly very interested in her sandwich. "So much for making friends," Diana muttered. They found an empty table near the windows and unpacked their lunches. Their mother had made their favorites: turkey sandwiches with avocado, apple slices, and homemade cookies. Simple comfort food for a day that felt anything but comfortable. "Physics teacher seems cool," David offered, trying to lighten the mood. "And calculus might actually be challenging for once." "English is good too," Diana agreed. "The curriculum looks interesting." They talked about their classes, their teachers, anything except the obvious tension that seemed to follow them through. The halls. They had learned over the years that acknowledging the elephant in the room too early could make things worse. After school, they walked home together, their conversation lighter now that they were away from the careful watching eyes of their classmates. The afternoon sun was warm and the suburban streets felt peaceful, almost sleepy. "Think it'll get better?" Diana asked as they turned onto their street. "It always does," David replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Just takes time." That evening, over dinner, their parents asked about their first day. The twins gave carefully positive reports mentioning their teachers and classes while glossing over the social dynamics. There was no point in worrying their parents over things that might resolve themselves. "The school seems very academic," their father observed. "That's good. Keep your grades up and you'll have plenty of opportunities when it comes time for college applications. Just remember," their mother added, "if anyone gives you trouble, you come to us immediately. Don't try to handle everything on your own." The twins nodded, but they both knew they would try to handle things themselves first. That's how they had always done it. That's how they had learned to survive. Later that night, David knocked softly on Diana's door. She was sitting at her desk, working on homework but staring out the window. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Just thinking about tomorrow," she replied. "And the day after that, and all the days until we graduate." "It's just 2 years," David reminded her. "We've done harder things." Diana smiled at her brother. He was right, of course. They had faced military moves, language barriers in Germany, and the social politics of multiple high schools. They were stronger because of it, more adaptable, more resilient. But as she looked out at the quiet street with its perfect houses and manicured lawns, Diana couldn't shake the feeling that this challenge might be different from all the others. 3 weeks into their time at Lincoln High, David and Diana had settled into a routine. Wake up early, walk to school together, attend classes, eat lunch at their usual table by the windows, and walk home. It was predictable, safe, and increasingly lonely. The academic work was challenging but manageable. Diana had already impressed her English teacher with an essay on identity and belonging, while David had caught the attention of the science department by solving a complex physics problem that had stumped previous classes. Their grades were solid, their teachers were supportive, and by most measures they were succeeding. But success in the classroom didn't translate to acceptance in the hallways. It started small, so small that Diana almost convinced herself she was imagining it. A group of boys would fall silent when she passed, then burst into laughter once she was a few steps away. Whispered comments that were just loud enough to catch fragments. Those new kids, and don't belong here, and words that made her stomach clench. David noticed it too. The way conversation shifted when he entered a room. The way some students would go out of their way to avoid sitting near him in the cafeteria. The way certain teachers would call on him more often, as if testing whether he really belonged in advanced classes. Maybe we should tell Mom and Dad, Diana suggested one evening as they walked home from school. Tell them what? David replied. That people look at us funny? That's not exactly breaking news. Diana kicked at a pile of autumn leaves. It feels different this time. More deliberate. She was right, and they both knew it. This wasn't the usual new kid curiosity they had experienced at other schools. This was something else, something that made the air feel thick with unspoken tensions. The real trouble started with Tommy Barrett. Tommy was a junior, 2 years older than the twins, and the kind of student who seemed to collect followers without trying. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he had something that made other kids want his approval. His father owned the largest car dealership in town, and his family had lived in the area for generations. At Lincoln High, that kind of history carried weight. Tommy had noticed the twins from their first day, but it took him 3 weeks to make his move. He chose his moment carefully, a crowded hallway between third and fourth period, when everyone was rushing to their next class, and teachers were busy preparing for the next wave of students. "Hey," Tommy called out as David passed his locker. "You're one of the new kids, right?" David paused, sensing the attention of nearby students. "Yeah, David Washington." "Washington," Tommy repeated, making the name sound foreign in his mouth. "That's interesting. Where'd you move from?" "Fort Bragg. My dad's military." Tommy nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Military, huh? That explains a lot." David waited for him to explain what it explained, but Tommy just smiled and turned back to his locker. The conversation was over, but David had the distinct feeling that something had just begun. At lunch that day, Diana was getting her food when she overheard a group of girls talking at the next table. "I heard they lived all over the place," one of them was saying, like they never stayed anywhere for more than a couple years. "That's so weird," another replied. "How do you even make friends like that?" "Maybe that's why they stick together so much. I mean, they literally sit by themselves every day." Diana grabbed her apple with more force than necessary and headed to her table. David was already there, picking at his sandwich with an expression that told her his morning hadn't gone much better. "Tommy Barrett?" she asked. "How'd you know?" "Lucky guess. Plus, his girlfriend's friends were just discussing our family history over chicken nuggets." David shook his head. 3 weeks. We made it 3 whole weeks before the real welcome committee showed up. But Tommy wasn't finished. Over the next few days, his attention intensified. He would appear in hallways where the twins were walking, always with a group of friends, always with comments that walked the line between curiosity and something darker. "Must be nice getting to travel all over," he said to Diana one morning, blocking her path to her locker. "See the world on the government's dime." Diana kept her expression neutral. "It has its advantages. I bet. No real roots anywhere. No real connections. Makes it easy to just move on when things get complicated." His friends laughed, and Diana realized this wasn't random conversation. This was performance, designed to establish something about the social order at Lincoln High. "Excuse me," she said, stepping around him to reach her locker. "Of course," Tommy replied, stepping aside with exaggerated politeness. "Wouldn't want to make you late for class." The comments grew bolder. Tommy would make loud observations about visitors and temporary residents when the twins passed. His friends picked up the theme, turning their presence into a running joke that followed them through the halls. "Think they'll still be here next year?" one of Tommy's friends asked loudly outside the gym. "Nah," Tommy replied. "People like that never stick around long enough to matter. David clenched his fists but kept walking. Diana had to grab his arm to keep him moving forward. "He's trying to get a reaction," she whispered. "Don't give him one." But ignoring the comments became harder when they started appearing in other places. Someone had written "visitors only" on David's locker in black marker. Diana found a note in her backpack that simply said, "When are you leaving?" Their parents noticed the change in their mood but couldn't get specific details about what was wrong. "Something's bothering you too," their mother observed over dinner one night. "School troubles?" "Just the usual adjustment stuff," Diana said, which was technically true. "You know you can talk to us about anything," their father added. "If someone's giving you problems, we can speak to the school." The twins exchanged a look across the table. They had learned over the years that parental intervention often made social problems worse, not better. Besides, what would they report? That Tommy Barrett was asking questions and making comments. That other students were treating them like temporary inconveniences rather than permanent additions to the school community? The situation escalated the day David decided to try out for the basketball team. He had played at his previous school and was genuinely talented. Sports had always been a way to connect with other students, to prove himself outside of academics. The tryouts were open to anyone, and David figured it might be a chance to change the narrative. Tommy was already on the team, of course. He had been starting point guard since his sophomore year and was considered one of the best players in the conference. When David showed up to tryouts, Tommy's expression made it clear that this was not a welcome development. During scrimmages, Tommy made sure David never got good passes. When David managed to score anyway, Tommy would find ways to criticize his technique or question his understanding of the plays. It was subtle enough that the coach didn't notice, but obvious enough that David got the message. "Nothing personal," Tommy said after practice as David was leaving the gym. "Just looking out for team chemistry, you understand." David understood perfectly. This wasn't about basketball. This was about maintaining the established order, about making sure outsiders knew their place. Diana was waiting for him outside the gym, and one look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "That bad?" she asked. "Worse," David replied, "but I'm not quitting." "Good," Diana said, "because I signed up for the debate team today, and apparently that's Tommy's girlfriend's territory." They walked home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The autumn air was crisp and the neighborhood looked as perfect as always. Neat lawns, clean sidewalks, houses that belonged in magazines. But underneath the surface beauty, they were beginning to understand the real rules of this place. That night, Diana lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the schools they had attended, all the communities they had joined and left behind. Some places had welcomed them immediately. Others had taken time but eventually accepted them. A few had remained distant but polite until the day they moved away. But this was the first place that felt actively hostile to their presence, the first community that seemed determined to remind them, daily, that they didn't belong. She could hear David moving around in the next room, probably doing the same thing she was, trying to figure out how to navigate the next day, the next week, the next 2 years in a place that had already decided they were unwelcome visitors rather than potential neighbors. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. Tommy's comments, his friends' laughter, the careful distance maintained by classmates, who might have been friends in different circumstances. The twins would smile, study hard, keep their heads down, and hope that time would eventually smooth the rough edges of their situation. But deep down, Diana was beginning to suspect that some places weren't interested in giving time a chance to work its magic. Some places preferred their boundaries clearly marked and their differences clearly defined. As sleep finally began to claim her, Diana made a silent promise to herself and to her brother. They would not be driven away. Whatever Tommy Barrett and his friends had planned, whatever test this community wanted to put them through, they would pass it. They had survived harder things than high school social politics. They would survive this too. The harassment had been building for weeks like storm clouds gathering on a summer afternoon. What started as sideways glances and whispered comments had grown into something darker, more deliberate. Tommy Barrett and his friends had made the twins their favorite target. And each day brought new ways to remind David and Diana that they were outsiders in a community that valued conformity above all else. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when things finally boiled over. Diana was at her locker before first period, organizing her books for the day. The hallway was busy with the usual pre-class rush, students grabbing materials and catching up on weekend gossip. She had learned to time her locker visits carefully, avoiding the periods when Tommy's group typically gathered nearby. But timing didn't matter anymore. Tommy had decided to escalate. Well, his voice carried across the hallway, loud enough to draw attention from nearby students. If it isn't our resident tourist? Diana didn't look up from her locker, hoping that ignoring him would make him lose interest and move on. She had learned that engaging with Tommy only encouraged him to perform for his audience. "I'm talking to you," Tommy said, his voice closer. Now. She could sense him approaching along with his usual group of followers. "I heard you," Diana replied quietly, still focused on her books. "I just don't have anything to say." "That's funny," Tommy continued, now standing directly behind her. "Because I have plenty to say. Like how weird it is that you and your brother think you can just show up here and act like you belong." Several students had stopped to watch the confrontation. Diana could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. The hallway had grown quieter, conversations dying as people tuned in to the drama unfolding near the lockers. "We're just trying to go to school," Diana said, closing her locker and turning to face Tommy. He was flanked by 3 friends, all of them wearing the same confident smirks that came from knowing they had home field advantage. "Just trying to go to school," Tommy repeated mockingly. "Right. Is that what you call it when you take spots away from kids who actually live here? When you join teams and clubs like you're planning to stick around?" Diana felt her jaw tighten. "We are planning to stick around. For 2 years. 2 years. One of Tommy's friends, Jake, laughed. "That's not planning to stick around. That's just a longer vacation." "Face it," Tommy said, stepping closer. "You're tourists, and this isn't your hometown. These aren't your people. This isn't your place." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Diana could feel her heart rate increasing, her muscles tensing in a way that her martial arts training had taught her to recognize. Her body was preparing for conflict even as her mind was still trying to find a peaceful way out. "We have every right to be here," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Rights," Tommy scoffed. "You think having rights is the same thing as belonging? You think because your daddy got transferred here that makes you one of us?" The racial undertone in his words was unmistakable now, even though he was careful not to say anything explicitly that could get him in official trouble, but everyone in the hallway understood what he was really saying. "That's enough," Diana said, starting to walk away. Tommy stepped sideways, blocking her path. "I don't think we're done talking." "Yes, we are," Diana replied, trying to step around him. But Jake moved to block her other side, and suddenly she found herself surrounded by the 4 boys. Other students were watching but not intervening, some looking uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. "See, this is the problem with people like you," Tommy said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You don't know when you're not wanted. You don't pick up on social cues. You just keep pushing into spaces where you don't belong." Diana's training kicked in, and she began to assess the situation tactically. 4 opponents, all bigger than her but moving clumsily, motivated by emotion, rather than skill. Multiple escape routes available if needed. Witnesses present, which meant any physical confrontation would have consequences beyond the immediate moment. "Move," she said simply. "Or what?" Tommy challenged. "You'll tell your daddy? You'll call the principal? Face it, you've got no power. Here. You're nobody here." That's when David appeared. He had been looking for Diana when the crowd in the hallway caught his attention. Pushing through the circle of watching students, he quickly sized up the situation and felt his own training begin to take over. "There a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made Tommy's friends glance nervously at each other. No problem, Tommy replied, but his confidence seemed to waver slightly now that the odds were more even. Just having a conversation with your sister about community standards. Conversation's over, David said, moving to stand beside Diana. Tommy's face flushed red. The presence of an audience meant he couldn't back down without losing face, but something in David's posture suggested this might not go the way he had planned. You two think you're better than us, Tommy said, his voice rising. With your fancy schools and your military family and your academic achievements. But you know what? None of that matters here. This is our town, our school, our territory. We never said we were better than anyone, Diana replied. We just want to be left alone. Left alone? Jake laughed. You joined the debate team. Your brother tried out for basketball. That's not being left alone. That's trying to take over. The conversation was drawing more attention now. Students were pulling out phones, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Teachers were still in their classrooms preparing for first period, unaware of the confrontation building in the hallway. This is ridiculous, David said. We're all students here. There's no reason we can't coexist. Coexist, Tommy repeated, making the word sound like an insult. See, that's where you're wrong. Some people belong and some people don't. Some people are temporary, and some people are permanent. You need to learn the difference. He stepped closer to David, close enough that other students could sense the rising tension. You need to learn your place. The words were barely out of his mouth when Tommy made his mistake. Whether he intended to push David or just gesture aggressively, his hand moved toward David's chest in a motion that was clearly threatening. David's response was instinctive and immediate. Years of martial arts training had taught him to recognize the moment when talk ended and action began. His hand moved up to intercept Tommy's arm, not violently, but with precision and control. Don't, David said quietly, but his grip on Tommy's wrist was firm enough to make his point clear. Tommy tried to pull away and found that he couldn't. David's hold wasn't painful, but it was absolute. For the first time in the confrontation, uncertainty flickered across Tommy's face. Let go of me, Tommy demanded, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. When you step back, David replied calmly. The hallway had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching, phones recording, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the moment that would define the twins' reputation at Lincoln High, for better or worse. Jake, seeing his friend in trouble, moved toward David. Hey, let him go. Diana stepped smoothly into Jake's path, her own training evident in the way she moved. She didn't touch him, but her positioning made it clear that reaching David would require going through her first. This doesn't have to get worse, she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority as her brother's. But Jake was committed now, motivated by loyalty to Tommy and the watching crowd. He reached out to push Diana aside, underestimating both her awareness and her ability to respond. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks. Jake's push never connected. Diana simply wasn't there when his hand arrived, having stepped aside with a fluidity that made it look like he had missed on purpose. Off balance from his failed attempt, Jake stumbled forward. At the same moment, Tommy tried to use his free hand to break David's grip, swinging wildly at his face. David ducked easily under the punch while maintaining his hold on Tommy's other wrist, then used Tommy's own momentum to guide him gently but firmly toward the lockers. It was over in seconds. Tommy found himself facing the lockers with his arm held securely behind his back. Not painfully, but completely controlled. Jake was on his hands and knees, having tripped over his own feet when Diana had simply stepped out of his way. The other, two boys in Tommy's group, had frozen, suddenly realizing that what they had thought would be an easy intimidation had turned into something very different. David released Tommy's arm and stepped back, his hands raised peacefully. We don't want to fight, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We just want to go to class. Tommy turned around, his face red with embarrassment and anger. The hallway full of students had just watched him get outmaneuvered by someone he had been trying to bully. His reputation, carefully built over years at Lincoln High, had taken a serious hit in less than 30 seconds. "This isn't over," he said, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. "It is for today," Diana replied, shouldering her backpack and starting to walk toward her first period class. David fell into step beside her, leaving Tommy and his friends to deal with their wounded pride and the crowd of students who had witnessed their humiliation. As they walked away, Diana could hear the excited chatter beginning behind them. Students who had been afraid to speak up were now discussing what they had seen, voices filled with surprise and admiration. "That was incredible," someone said. "Did you see how fast she moved? Where did they learn to do that?" But Diana wasn't paying attention to the praise. She was thinking about consequences, about how Tommy would respond to being embarrassed in front of half the school, about whether they had just solved their problem or made it much worse. "Think we just painted targets on our backs?" she asked David quietly. "Maybe," he replied. "But at least now people know we can defend ourselves." As they reached Diana's classroom, she paused at the doorway and looked back down the hallway. Tommy and his friends were gone, but clusters of students were still talking animatedly about what they had witnessed. For better or worse, the twins were no longer invisible at Lincoln High. The question now was whether their newfound visibility would bring them acceptance or even more trouble. The video had been online for less than 6 hours, but it felt like the entire world had seen it. Diana sat in the school library during lunch, trying to focus on her chemistry homework, while students at nearby tables whispered and pointed in her direction. The footage from that morning's hallway confrontation had made its way to every social media platform imaginable, with captions ranging from "New kids show bullies who's boss" to "Military twins serve justice." She had watched it herself, reluctantly, when her friend Jennifer from English class had shown it to her on her phone. The video quality was surprisingly good, clearly showing Tommy's aggressive approach, his attempt to block her path, and the moment when everything changed. What struck Diana most was how different the encounter looked from the outside. On camera, she and David appeared calm and controlled, while Tommy and his friends looked clumsy and unprepared. 12,000 views already, Jennifer had said, her voice filled with amazement. "And the comments are crazy. Everyone's trying to figure out where you guys learned to move like that." Now, sitting in the library, Diana was beginning to understand that their lives at Lincoln High had just taken a dramatic turn. The question was whether it would be for better or worse. David found her there 20 minutes later, sliding into the chair across from her with the expression that suggested his afternoon had been just as surreal. "So," he said quietly, "apparently, we're famous. Good famous or bad famous? That depends on who you ask. Coach Williams wants to know if I'm still interested in basketball tryouts. 3 different teachers have asked me about my training background, and Tommy Barrett hasn't been seen since 3rd period." Diana closed her textbook and leaned back in her chair. "Jennifer showed me the video. We look competent? I was going to say dangerous." David glanced around the library, noting the curious stares they were still attracting. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. At least people aren't treating us like we're invisible anymore." Before Diana could respond, a familiar voice interrupted their conversation. "Excuse me?" They looked up to see a tall girl with short auburn hair and an expression that was both nervous and determined. Diana recognized her from her AP history class, Rachel Chen, one of the quieter students who always sat in the front row and rarely spoke unless called upon. "I'm sorry to bother you," Rachel continued, "but I wanted to say thank you." David and Diana exchanged confused glances. "Thank you for what?" Diana asked. Rachel shifted her backpack nervously. "For standing up to Tommy. I know you were defending yourselves, but he's been making life miserable for a lot of people here. Not just you." She pulled out a chair and sat down, lowering her voice. "I've been at this school for 3 years, and Tommy's been targeting anyone who doesn't fit his idea of what belongs here. Last year, he made my friend Luis so miserable that Luis transferred to another school, and there's been others." Diana felt a cold realization settling in her stomach. "We weren't the first." "Not even close," Rachel confirmed. But you're the first ones who didn't just take it. You're the first ones who showed everyone that he's not as powerful as he pretends to be. As if summoned by their conversation, two more students approached their table. One was a junior named Michael, whom David recognized from his physics class, and the other was a sophomore girl named Asia, who had been in Diana's English class the previous week. "Mind if we sit?" Michael asked. "We wanted to talk to you about something." Soon their table was surrounded by students, all of them speaking, in hushed tones about their own experiences with Tommy and his friends. The stories were disturbingly similar: racist comments disguised as jokes, social exclusion, academic sabotage, and a systematic campaign to make certain students feel unwelcome at their own school. He told the soccer coach that I probably wasn't committed to the team because my family moves around a lot, shared a girl named Priya, whose father worked for a tech company. "I've lived here for 4 years, but because my parents are from India, he convinced people I was just passing through. He started a rumor that I only got into AP classes because of diversity requirements," added Michael, whose academic record was actually better than Tommy's. "Made me doubt myself for months." Asia nodded grimly. "He told people my scholarship application essay was probably written by someone else because it was too sophisticated for someone like me. I almost didn't apply to any colleges because I started believing him." David listened to story after story, feeling a growing anger at the systematic nature of what Tommy had been doing. This wasn't just random bullying. It was a deliberate campaign to maintain social hierarchies and keep certain students in their place. "Why didn't anyone report this?" Diana asked. Rachel laughed bitterly. "To who? The administration? Tommy's dad donates money to the school. His family has connections throughout the community, and most of what he does is just subtle enough to dismiss as teenage drama or miscommunication. Plus," Michael added, "he's smart about it. He never does anything when teachers are around, and he's got enough followers that anyone who speaks up gets targeted too." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of someone unexpected. Jennifer, Diana's friend from English class, along with 2 other students Diana didn't recognize. "Sorry," Jennifer said, slightly out of breath. "We heard you guys were meeting and wanted to join." Over the next few minutes, their impromptu gathering grew to nearly 15 students. They represented different grades, different social groups, different backgrounds, but they all had one thing in common. They had all been affected by Tommy's behavior in some way. "So what happens now?" asked a quiet boy named Sam. "Tommy's not going to just disappear because he got embarrassed this morning. He'll probably come back worse," Priya warned. "He doesn't like losing control." David had been listening to the conversation while thinking about their options. His military upbringing had taught him to assess situations strategically, and what he was hearing suggested that this problem was bigger than just their personal conflict with Tommy. "What if we document everything?" he suggested. "Not just what happened to us, but all of it. Every incident, every comment, every pattern of behavior." "Build a case?" Michael asked, his interest clearly piqued. "Exactly. Make it impossible to dismiss as isolated incidents or misunderstandings." Diana could see where her brother was going with this. "And create a support network. Make it clear that people don't have to face this alone." Rachel leaned forward excitedly. "We could start a club, something official that the school would have to recognize." "What kind of club?" Asia asked. "Diversity and inclusion," Jennifer suggested. "Anti-bullying?" "Student advocacy," Diana said, the idea forming as she spoke. "Focused on creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and safe." The energy at their table was shifting from anger and frustration to something more positive and constructive. For the first time in weeks, Diana felt like they weren't just surviving their situation, they were taking control of it. "We'd need a faculty sponsor," Michael pointed out. "Mrs. Rodriguez would do it," Diana said, thinking of her English teacher. "She's always talking about the importance of diverse voices and perspectives." "And Mr. Patterson from the counseling office," Rachel added. "He's been trying to address these issues for years but needs student support to make anything happen." As they talked, their plans became more concrete. They would propose an official student organization focused on promoting inclusion and addressing harassment. They would create systems for reporting and documenting incidents. They would organize events and discussions designed to bring different groups together. But most importantly, they would make it clear that students like Tommy could no longer operate with impunity. "There's something else," Asia said hesitantly. "The video from this morning, it's really blown up online. People are sharing it because they think it's cool that you stood up to bullies. But some are sharing it because they think you were too aggressive." David nodded. "We figured that might happen." "The thing is," Asia continued, "most of the negative comments are coming from people who don't even go to this school. The students here, especially the ones who know what's really been going on, they're on your side." This was confirmed over the next hour as more students approached their table. Some came to share their own stories, others to offer support, and a few simply to express their admiration for what David and Diana had done that morning. By the time the lunch period ended, they had the foundation of something that felt like a movement. As students began to disperse to their afternoon classes, Rachel lingered behind. "I have to ask," she said, "where did you learn to handle yourselves like that? Because what happened this morning wasn't just luck." Diana and David exchanged a look. They had been wondering when someone would ask this question directly. "Our parents enrolled us in martial arts when we were 8, David explained. "Taekwondo, first then boxing. Being military kids, we moved around a lot and they wanted us to be able to defend ourselves if necessary. But it's not just about fighting," Diana added. "It's about discipline, control, confidence. Most of what we learned was how to avoid fights, not start them." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you learned, it worked. Tommy's whole power structure was based on people being afraid of him. You showed everyone that he's not as scary as he pretends to be." As they walked to their afternoon classes, Diana felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Lincoln: high hope. Not just for their own situation, but for the possibility of real change. The video might have made them temporarily famous, but the conversations in the library had revealed something more important. They weren't alone. There were other students who shared their values, who wanted the same things they wanted, who were ready to work for positive change. Tommy Barrett and his friends represented the old way of doing things at Lincoln High, a system based on exclusion, intimidation, and maintaining rigid social hierarchies. But change was coming whether they liked it or not, and it was being led by students who had learned that standing together was more powerful than standing alone. 6 months later, Diana stood at the podium in the school auditorium, looking out at an audience that would have been unimaginable when she first arrived at Lincoln High. The monthly student advocacy club meeting had grown from their small library gathering to become one of the most well-attended events at the school. "Before we start today's discussion about the peer mentorship program," Diana said into the microphone, "I want to share some numbers with you." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. "Since we started tracking incidents through our reporting system, documented cases of harassment at Lincoln High have dropped by 73%. But more importantly, the number of students who say they feel comfortable reporting problems has increased by over 200%. Applause filled the auditorium, and Diana felt the familiar surge of pride and disbelief that had become her constant companion over the past months. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but it had been real. In the audience, she could see familiar faces from that first library meeting, along with dozens of newer members who had joined as word spread about what they were trying to accomplish. Teachers sat alongside students, parents next to community members, all united by a shared commitment to making Lincoln High a place where everyone could thrive. "Our next speaker," Diana continued, "is someone who knows firsthand about the power of second chances and personal growth. Please welcome Tommy Barrett." The applause was polite but genuine as Tommy walked to the podium. His transformation over the past months had been one of the most surprising developments in the club's short history, and certainly the most controversial. It had started 3 weeks after the hallway incident, when Tommy had asked to speak privately with David and Diana. The meeting, held in Mr. Patterson's office with the counselor present, had been awkward and tense at first. "I want to apologize," Tommy had said, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Not just for what happened that day, but for everything. The way I treated you, the things I said, the way I tried to make you Feel unwelcome here? Diana had been skeptical. Why now? Tommy had been quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I watched that video and I saw myself the way everyone else saw me, and I didn't like what I saw. The apology had been just the beginning. Tommy had asked to meet regularly with Mr. Patterson to work through his own issues and understand how his behavior had affected others. He had reached out to other students he had targeted over the years, offering apologies and asking how he could make amends. Most surprisingly, he had asked to join the Student Advocacy Club. Not everyone had been supportive of the decision to let him participate. Some members felt that allowing Tommy in undermined everything they stood for. Others worried that he was just trying to rehabilitate his image without making real changes. But David and Diana had advocated for inclusion, arguing that true change required giving people the opportunity to grow and contribute positively. Now, standing at the podium, Tommy cleared his throat and began to speak. 6 months ago, I was the problem this club was created to address, he said, his voice steady but humble. I used my position at this school to make other students feel unwelcome, unsafe, and unwanted. I told myself I was protecting something valuable. But what I was really doing was protecting my own privilege and power. He paused, looking out at the audience with an expression that Diana had learned to recognize as genuine. I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can commit to being part of the solution going forward. That's why I'm here today to announce a new initiative that I'll be leading with the support of the club. Tommy clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed plan for a peer mediation program designed to address conflicts before they escalated into harassment or bullying. The program will train students to recognize warning signs, de-escalate tensions, and create opportunities for dialogue between people who might otherwise become enemies, he explained. Because I've learned that the best way to prevent someone from becoming a bully is to help them understand the impact of their actions before it's too late. The presentation was well received, and afterward, several students approached Tommy to volunteer for the mediation training. Watching these interactions, Diana reflected on how much had changed since that confrontation in the hallway. The immediate aftermath of the video going viral had been complicated. While many students at Lincoln High had been supportive, the attention from outside the school had been mixed. Some people praised the twins for standing up to bullies, while others criticized them for using physical techniques to resolve a conflict. Their parents had been called in for meetings with the administration, and for a few tense days, it had seemed like David and Diana might face suspension despite being the victims in the situation. But the outpouring of support from other students, combined with the documentation of Tommy's pattern of harassment, had ultimately led to a very different outcome. Instead of punishing the twins, the school had implemented new policies around bullying and harassment, created better reporting systems, and provided funding for the Student Advocacy Club. The viral video, rather than getting them in trouble, had become the catalyst for systematic change. The club had grown rapidly, attracting students who had previously felt voiceless and adults who wanted to support their efforts. Mrs. Rodriguez had enthusiastically agreed to be their faculty sponsor, and Mr. Patterson had provided crucial guidance on developing effective programs and policies. But perhaps the most significant change had been in the school's social dynamics. The clear message that harassment would not be tolerated, combined with active efforts to build bridges between different groups, had created an environment where students felt safer being themselves. Diana had seen this change reflected in dozens of small moments. A shy freshman asking questions in class without fear of being mocked, a student with a disability joining the drama club and being welcomed enthusiastically, international students sharing their cultural backgrounds during lunch discussions rather than hiding them. Even David's basketball tryouts had eventually worked out. After Tommy stepped back from his leadership role on the team and publicly supported David's inclusion, the coach had invited David to join. The team had gone on to have their best season in years, with David's skills and Tommy's reformed leadership, creating a dynamic that elevated everyone's performance. Now, as the meeting wound down and students began to file out of the auditorium, Diana found herself surrounded by club members wanting to discuss upcoming projects and initiatives. The energy was infectious, and she felt grateful to be part of something that was making such a tangible difference. David appeared at her side, having finished his own conversation with a group of students interested in starting a martial arts club focused on discipline and conflict resolution, rather than fighting. "Ready to head home?" he asked. As they walked across the parking lot, Diana thought about how different this routine felt compared to those first lonely walks 6 months earlier. Now, students called out friendly greetings, teachers waved from their cars, and the school building behind them felt like a place where they truly belonged. "Think it'll last?" David asked, reading her thoughts as he often did. "The changes? I think so. We've built something that's bigger than any one person now. It has its own momentum." They had learned over the months that sustainable change required more than just confronting bad behavior. It required creating systems and cultures that supported good behavior. The club had become one of those systems, but so had the new reporting procedures, the peer mediation program, the diversity education initiatives, and the dozens of other projects that had grown out of their initial effort. At home, their parents were waiting with dinner and the usual questions about their day. Colonel Washington had been quietly proud of his children's leadership role in transforming their school culture, while Dr. Washington had used her connections at the hospital to help expand some of their programs to other schools in the district. "Any interesting developments today?" their mother asked as they sat down to eat. "Tommy's peer mediation program got approved by the administration," Diana reported, "and we got confirmation that 3 other schools want to start their own versions of our advocacy club." Mrs. Chen from the PTA called, their father added. "She wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at the district school board meeting next month about your anti-harassment initiatives." David and Diana exchanged a look. Public speaking at school board meetings felt like a big step up from their library conversations, but they had learned that their story resonated with people who were trying to create positive change in their own communities. "We'll do it," Diana said. "If it helps other students avoid what we went through, it's worth it." Later that evening, as Diana worked on homework in her room, she found herself looking at the martial arts medals and academic awards hanging on her wall. They represented years of discipline, hard work, and personal growth, but now they also reminded her of something else: the importance of using your skills and abilities to help others. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, who was now the club's vice president. "Did you see the email from the state education department? They want to feature our program in their monthly newsletter." Diana smiled and typed back, "Wow, remember when we thought we were just trying to survive high school? Now we're trying to change it," came Rachel's quick reply. Who would have thought? Who would have thought indeed? 6 months ago, Diana had been focused on simply getting through each day without incident, on keeping her head down and avoiding trouble until graduation. She never could have imagined that a moment of standing up for herself would lead to becoming a leader in a movement that was spreading beyond their school to impact other communities. But that's what had happened. Sometimes the most important changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. The decision to not back down, to stand up for yourself and others, to believe that things can be better than they are. As she settled down to sleep, Diana thought about tomorrow's activities: a club planning meeting at lunch, a peer mediation training session after school, and a Skype call with students from another district who wanted advice on starting their own advocacy program. It would be a busy day, but a good one. She was no longer the new student trying to find her place at Lincoln High. She was a leader, a change maker, a young person who had discovered that the best way to belong somewhere was to help create a place where everyone could belong. The transformation of Lincoln High was far from complete, and there would always be new challenges to address. But the foundation had been laid for something lasting and meaningful: a school culture based on inclusion rather than exclusion, on lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down. And it had all started with 2 teenagers who refused to accept that harassment and intimidation were just the way things are. They had proven that with courage, persistence, and the willingness to work together, even the most entrenched problems could be solved. The future felt bright with possibility.